There was a letter taped to my front door that just said, "This property is not recognized as part of Willow Bend HOA. Vacate within 90 days." I thought it was a prank until the locks on the community pool stopped working for my key fob. When we first moved into Willow Bend, I remember thinking, this is it. This is where we'll finally exhale. Julia had fallen in love with the school across the street before we even stepped foot in the house. She said, "I can see Max walking there with his little backpack." Ellie was still in a stroller, more interested in chewing on her stuffed rabbit than real estate, but she looked pretty content under the oaks lining the street. It felt like one of those neighborhoods you only ever see in State Farm commercials. Quiet, clean, not too fancy, not too plain. Just right. We had been renting for years in a shoebox apartment near downtown Raleigh, and when Julia's mom passed, she left us just enough to cover a down payment. I still remember the day we got the keys, how Max kept opening and closing every cabinet like he was testing out the house's personality. Julia cried a little. I didn't, but I did walk into the empty living room, looked around, and just whispered, "Ours." We bought the house through a small local real estate agency, nothing flashy. The agent, Maria, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who wore a smartwatch that kept vibrating during our tour. She walked us through all the usual stuff, HOA fees, bylaws, community rules. "They're a little strict," she said, "but nothing crazy, just the usual suburban micromanaging. Don't paint your garage door neon, don't build a chicken coop, that kind of thing." I nodded along. It didn't bother me. I wasn't planning to start a poultry farm or throw keggers in the cul-de-sac. We signed the paperwork. There were a lot of documents, a blur of PDF attachments and DocuSigns and meetings with the mortgage broker. I read through everything I could, but by that point my brain was fried and my hands were sore from signing. I remember one form with a section for HOA acknowledgement. I signed it. It was there, it had to be. We were told it was required. That was that. The move was a blur. Boxes, sweat, a pinched nerve in my back from lifting the damn dining table wrong. But we made it. Max decorated his room with robot posters, Ellie turned the hallway into her personal art gallery, and Julia brought out her ridiculous collection of succulents that I swear multiplied when we weren't looking. I spent the first few weeks figuring out where the breaker box was, fighting with the sprinkler timer, and realizing my neighbor, Ed, had opinions about lawn edging that bordered on religious doctrine. I work from home, mostly. Archival digitization, old city records, property ledgers, sometimes university collections. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. I've seen enough dusty filing cabinets and mismatched metadata to last 3 lifetimes. I kept thinking how ironic it was that I, of all people, ended up tangled in a paperwork nightmare. But that came later. In those early days, it felt good. Simple. We hosted a couple barbecues. Nothing big. Just burgers, music, some of the neighbors. People brought wine or store-bought cookies and told the same stories about HOA board meetings like they were war veterans. There were whispers about the president, Len Carlisle. "Don't piss him off," someone said, half joking. "He'll have your backyard condemned." I laughed too. I didn't even know what that meant. Funny thing though, I never once got an invite to a board meeting. Not a flyer, not a newsletter. I thought maybe it was digital, maybe they had the wrong email on file. It didn't bother me too much. I figured if they needed me, they'd find me. Julia asked once, shouldn't we be more involved? I told her the truth. I just want to mow the lawn and be left alone. And for a while, we were, until that letter showed up. The first time I thought something was off was when my HOA key fob stopped working at the pool gate. We had promised Max and Ellie a quick dip before dinner. It was one of those hot, muggy days where the air feels like soup, and no matter how many fans you turn on, everyone's cranky. Julia packed a bag, I grabbed towels, and we walked over like we'd done a dozen times before. The kids were already arguing about who would jump in first. Max liked cannonballs. Ellie liked pretending she was a mermaid princess who ruled the deep end. It was just life, our life. But when I held my key fob up to the gate reader, nothing happened. No beep, no click. Just the same red light like I was holding up a Lego brick instead of a pass. I tried again. Same thing. I wiped it on my shirt, swiped it slower, swiped it faster. Nada. Behind us, another family rolled up. Steve and Holly, the couple from the corner with twin boys and matching Under Armour, everything. Steve waved his fob, and click, the gate buzzed open like nothing. I tried slipping in behind them with a shrug, but Holly turned around with this polite little smile and said, "Oh, I think that's only supposed to be one family at a time now. Len sent out an email." It was weird. Holly and I had chatted a bunch of times. Our kids had eaten popsicles on the same porch. But now, something in her eyes flickered like she wasn't totally sure I was who she thought I was. Like I'd shown up to a party I wasn't actually invited to. I laughed it off, said I'd check with the board, and we walked the kids home. Ellie was on the edge of tears. Max kept muttering about how technology always sucks. I figured maybe the fob just needed to be reprogrammed. Batteries die, systems glitch. No big deal. So I emailed the HOA. Just a quick note, hey, our key's not working, can we get a replacement? I even offered to swing by the clubhouse or pay a small fee if needed. I got an auto reply back that said the account associated with my address was not in good standing and that inquiries could only be made by verified members. I read it 3 times. Not in good standing? What does that even mean? I forwarded the message to Julia. Her reply was short. What are they talking about? We've never even missed a payment. Then, about a week later, I came home and saw a small manila envelope sticking out of our mailbox, not even sealed. No stamp. Inside was the letter, printed on HOA letterhead with the Willow Bend logo at the top and everything. It said, after internal review, it appears your address was mistakenly included in our HOA registry during the initial community expansion. Due to this clerical error, and because your property technically falls outside the boundaries ratified by vote, your participation in Willow Bend HOA is considered invalid. We respectfully request that you vacate the property within 90 days to allow for correction of zoning inconsistencies. That was the exact wording. I remember because I read it out loud to Julia while she stood in the doorway holding a spoon. She didn't say a word until I got to the vacate within 90 days part. Then she laughed. One short, sharp laugh like she thought I was messing with her. I wasn't. It didn't make any sense. We paid our dues. We bought the house fair and square. We had closing documents, property taxes, mortgage statements. We were part of the HOA since day one, or at least we thought we were. I called the number on the letter, but no one answered. Just a voicemail telling me to leave a message for compliance services. I did. Twice. Nothing. The next day, our trash didn't get picked up. That happens sometimes, I know, but our cans weren't even touched. The neighbors' bins were empty, lined up like little soldiers. Ours stood full, baking in the sun. That was the first moment where something started to twist in my gut. I didn't say anything to the kids. Julia tried to stay upbeat, but that night, while we were brushing our teeth, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "Do you think they can really do that?" And I told her no. I told her it had to be some ridiculous bureaucratic error, something stupid and fixable. But I didn't believe it. Not really. At first, I kept telling myself it would blow over, that someone behind a desk would finally respond, realize the mix-up, and fix it with a new email and maybe an awkward apology. But that's not what happened. What happened was way quieter, slower. It came in pieces, like rain soaking through your shirt before you realize it's pouring. The next thing was the lawn notice, just a plain piece of paper folded once, tucked under a rock on the front step like some passive-aggressive treasure map. Vegetation encroachment, Section B. No signature, no logo, just that. Now, I'm not going to pretend our yard looks like a golf course, but it's clean. I edge it, I mow. Julia's got her raised beds and that stupid bird bath she found on Facebook Marketplace that looks like it came from a Halloween store. But our yard doesn't encroach anything. It's not even near the sidewalk. I went out there with a tape measure and checked, just to be sure. Julia watched me from the window like I'd lost it. Maybe I had. Then came the next email, from the HOA attorney no less. Cold, mechanical, full of legal jargon that made me want to punch a printer. According to them, I was occupying a property under false pretense. They said they would seek relief through appropriate legal channels if we didn't comply with relocation proceedings within the designated timeline. I stared at the screen for a long time. That word stuck with me, occupying, like we were squatters, like we'd crept into the neighborhood in the middle of the night and started pretending to belong here. Julia called Maria, the agent who sold us the house. She didn't pick up. We left voicemails. Then she finally texted back 2 words, no comment. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Either she knew more than she let on, or someone told her to shut up. We tried talking to Ed next door. I caught him unloading groceries and figured I'd bring it up casually, maybe see if he'd heard anything. But the second I mentioned the HOA, his face went blank. He said, "Man, I don't really get involved in that stuff," then practically ran inside like I was asking him to help bury a body. Same with the other neighbors. People I used to wave to started looking through me. It was like the whole street had agreed, silently, that we were something else, something outside the lines. Then came the real kicker. Julia got a call from the school. Max and Ellie had both been flagged for out-of-boundary attendance. According to the new district records, our address didn't fall within the zoning limits for Willow Creek Elementary. Julia was livid. She tried to explain. We live across the damn street, but the woman on the phone just kept repeating the same thing. We have to go by what's on file. I swear, I saw something snap in Julia that day. She spent the whole night in the office going through file cabinets, pulling out our mortgage papers, escrow letters, school registration, old HOA newsletters, anything that had our name and address on it. We spread them all out on the dining table like we were building a crime wall. And then we noticed something else. That welcome packet we got from the HOA when we moved in, the one that had the community guidelines, trash pickup days, bylaws, all that stuff, it was gone. Not just missing, gone. Neither of us could remember throwing it away. We had the envelope it came in, the magnet with the pool hours stuck to the fridge, but none of the actual documents, not even the intro letter. It was like someone had reached into our home and quietly erased the evidence that we ever belonged. I checked our emails too. Every single one I'd gotten from the HOA over the years. They were all gone, not in trash, not in archives, just vanished. I'd never deleted them. I'm the guy who has 10 years of receipts in labeled folders, but there was nothing. No meeting invites, no policy updates, nothing about the annual dues. Even the digital payment records were missing. I tried logging into the HOA portal. My login no longer existed. I thought maybe it was a glitch. I emailed support. They told me no account existed for my name or address. I called Brent, the guy across the neighborhood who used to work in zoning enforcement. He used to show up to BBQs in cargo shorts and make dad jokes. I asked him if he'd ever heard of something like this happening. He went quiet for a second, then said, "Man, I don't want to get involved, but if I were you, I'd start printing everything. Right now." That night, after the kids went to bed, Julia sat down across from me with a glass of wine she barely touched and said, "Ethan, what if this was never a mistake?" She didn't say it dramatically, she said it tired, hollow. I laughed it off, or tried to. But there was this weight in my chest I couldn't shake, because deep down, I'd already started asking myself the same question. What if this wasn't a glitch? What if this was a plan? First thing I did was call a lawyer. Nothing fancy, just a guy named Doug my buddy Trevor used when he had a neighbor try to sue him over a fence that was apparently 6 inches too tall. Doug was one of those guys who talked with his eyes closed and wore polos with the logo of his own firm embroidered on the chest, like he wasn't quite ready to admit he worked out of a strip mall behind a vape shop. Still, he knew property law. I sent him everything I had. Title, deed, tax records, mortgage statements. I even sent a screenshot of the payment receipt for our HOA dues from the year before, which I'd only found because Julia had saved it as a PDF on her desktop under the file name Stupid Jakar Show A. Final. Final. Really final. Doug called me back after a day or two and said, "So, the good news is, yeah, you own the house. No question. Bad news? This HOA's got a weird setup, and I've seen stuff like this before. Not often, but when it happens, it's messy." He said what they were trying to do wasn't technically eviction, it was more like constructive exclusion, which is lawyer speak for slowly pushing someone out without ever physically removing them. Death by paperwork. He offered to send a cease and desist to the HOA on our behalf. Said it probably wouldn't fix anything, but it would show them we weren't rolling over. We sent it. Got no reply. So I went down to the county recorder's office. I figured I'd talk to a real human, explain the situation, and maybe find the missing paperwork trail. The guy behind the counter, young, looked like he still lived with his parents, typed in our address, stared at his screen, then frowned. He said, that parcel's flagged as conditional residential, no HOA affiliation in the zoning layer." Conditional residential? I asked what that meant. He shrugged, said it was usually temporary designations for planned developments that never got finalized. Then he said, "You sure your house is supposed to be there?" I said, "I live in it." He nodded like that didn't really answer anything. Then I drove to city planning. It was one of those offices that still had fluorescent lights and carpet that smelled like wet pencils. I asked for public records. I got some printed maps. Our street was there. Our house was there. But the area we were in, our specific section, had this faint dotted outline around it, like a mistake someone never quite erased. The zoning note next to it said, Phase 3, under review, status unknown. Phase 3 of what? No one could answer. I talked to a woman named Tanya who used to run the PTA when Max was in first grade. She worked at the school board now. I asked if there was anything she could do about the school zoning thing. She looked me up in the system, said our address wasn't showing up at all anymore. Not that we were in the wrong district, just not in any. She looked uncomfortable, like just talking to me might get her in trouble. She said, "Maybe talk to the board directly?" But honestly, I don't think this is a school issue. It's something else. I asked, "Like what?" She didn't answer. Julia started writing emails like it was her second job, to the HOA, to the zoning commission, to the city council. She even sent one to the local news station's consumer help segment. We didn't hear back from any of them. One night I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. Just something simple. Anyone else having HOA issues would love to chat offline. The post was up for maybe 6 minutes before it vanished. Deleted. No notification. Nothing. When I checked again, I was no longer a member of the group. Blocked. I reached out to the moderator, this guy named Chase, who used to ask people not to park on the grass like he was the mayor of suburbia. I'd helped him move a grill once. He didn't reply. Instead, I got a message from someone I didn't know. No profile photo, just a message that said, "You're not making friends, Ethan." That was the first time I actually felt scared. Julia and I talked about moving. She brought it up like she was just exploring options, but I knew what she meant. She was tired. She was scared for the kids. She hated seeing Max walk to school with his shoulders hunched like he expected someone to shove him into the bushes. She hated feeling watched. I didn't blame her. But I couldn't bring myself to agree. Because leaving would mean admitting they were right. That I didn't belong here. That somehow I had never belonged. And that idea, it crawled under my skin in a way I can't explain. So I told her no, not yet, not until I knew the truth, not until I proved we were real. I don't even know why I was in the attic that day. Maybe I was looking for something to do with my hands. Maybe I was avoiding another one of those "what's our plan?" conversations with Julia that always ended with silence and a glass of wine sitting untouched on the table. Whatever the reason, I found myself up there, sweating like hell, digging through old boxes like I expected to find answers in between Halloween decorations and Max's preschool art projects. And then I saw it. It was this old cardboard box, shoved behind a pile of insulation sheets. I don't remember ever putting it there. It wasn't labeled. It had tape that was starting to peel at the corners like it had been there for years. Inside were all our closing documents, the original stack, like the full package, the stuff we signed when we bought the house. I thought I'd already seen all of it, but this box had things I didn't remember, like a folded-up site map of the neighborhood, printed on oversized paper that crinkled like dried leaves when I opened it. The twist didn't come in the form of some dramatic discovery, no manila envelope with "confidential" stamped on it, no mystery witness stepping out of the shadows. It came from a shoebox. Literally. A dusty cardboard shoebox wedged between old lighting gels and a cracked extension cord in my uncle's workshop. I'd been cleaning. Not for fun, more like stress pacing with purpose. I needed to do something with my hands before I started constructing a moat around my property. So I opened up a storage cabinet I hadn't touched yet and found this old Nike box with prop keys written in Sharpie across the top. Inside, mostly junk. A rusted lock, a broken harmonica, a program from some 1987 production of King Lear. But underneath all of that was a tiny voice recorder, one of those ancient digital ones with the red record button that clicks like a stapler. I almost didn't turn it on. I figured it probably had old stage cues or one of Nando's weird monologues he liked to practice at 2 a.m. But curiosity got me. I popped in some fresh batteries, hit play, and... "This is Fernando Mendoza, May 18th, 2020. I want this on record in case anything happens to me because I don't trust Barbara Clennon as far as I can throw one of her damn garden gnomes." I froze. He sounded tired, breathy. This was just a few months before he died, and you could hear it in his voice, raspy like he was recording between coughing fits. He went on. "She came by again today, with papers this time, said I should sign this cultural access agreement so they can start using the amphitheater for community events. Told her no, told her hell no, she didn't like that. Got that tight little smile like she does when she thinks she's being clever. Said, think carefully about what legacy you want to leave. Like it was a threat. Maybe it was." Then silence, just static and a faint wheeze like he was thinking. "Anyway, I'm not signing a damn thing. I told her in writing and out loud. She can take her little HOA army and choke on a sound permit." I must have stood there for 5 minutes just letting that play on a loop. Because here's the thing. Barbara had claimed, with a straight face, that my uncle had signed a participation agreement with the HOA 6 months before I moved in. Some form supposedly attached to his estate file buried in their heritage archive. I hadn't seen the actual document yet. Their lawyer refused to send a full copy citing privacy protocols even though the man was dead and I was the heir. But now I had proof that it was a lie. He didn't just not sign it, he actively resisted it. Said no in writing, said no on tape, said no with the kind of disgust you only reserve for people who bring potato salad to a dinner party and then ask to keep the leftovers. That moment, it hit me hard. Because all this time I'd been fighting back to protect something I loved. but now I realized I was also defending something my uncle had already fought for. Maybe even knew he wouldn't be around to protect himself. It wasn't just about property anymore, it was about principle, about legacy, about some smug little tyrant trying to rewrite history because she thought no one would check the fine print. I backed up the recording, made 5 copies, and uploaded it to 3 cloud drives just in case Barbara suddenly got into arson. Then I called a lawyer friend from New York, someone who owed me a favor from back when I helped her stage a courtroom scene for an off-Broadway show. She listened to the recording, asked 3 questions, and then said, "Oh, she's screwed." Not, "You've got a shot." Not, "Maybe we can fight this." Just flat out, "She's screwed." And for the first time in weeks, I felt it. Calm. Cold, righteous calm. They thought they were dealing with some artsy transplant with a rickety house and a bad attitude, but they forgot something kind of important. I design stories for a living. I know how to set the stage. And I was about to give Barbara Clennon one hell of a third act. The thing about me is, I don't do rage. Not the loud kind, anyway. I don't throw things. I don't scream into pillows. I don't write all-caps emails at 2 a.m. with 37 exclamation points. What I do is plot, I sit, I sketch, I storyboard. You give me a problem and a few quiet hours, I'll give you a 6-scene solution with lighting cues and a surprise ending. So that's what I did. I sat down at the old drafting table in my uncle's workshop, poured myself a glass of mezcal, and started drawing. First thing I knew, the tape was my ace. No one could spin their way out of that. The tone, the phrasing, the date stamp, it was undeniable. Barbara Clennon had fabricated an agreement after my uncle's death, and I had him, in his own words, calling her out before it even happened. But I wasn't going to blow it all in one angry email. Nah, that's not theater. That's tantrum. What I needed was an event. See, I had a few advantages most people in HOA hell don't have. I know stagecraft, I know timing, and I've spent 2 decades working with actors who can cry on cue and stab you with a monologue. So I started calling in favors. First up, my friend, June. Retired stage manager, currently running a community theater 2 towns over. I told her I needed a crew, nothing fancy, just a few trusted performers, some light gear, and a willingness to participate in a bit of experimental immersive theater outdoors in the desert heat with a very aggressive HOA audience. Her response? Tell me when and how weird. Next, props and set dressing. That's where my friend Liam came in, art director turned children's book illustrator, living off-grid with a shed full of retired museum mannequins. He's the kind of guy who'll build you a fake time machine if you bribe him with red licorice. Then there was the location, which obviously was my backyard, my amphitheater. I figured if they wanted to use it so badly, I'd let them, just once, but on my terms. So I drafted up invitations, clean, elegant, official-looking cards that read, "Special Presentation, a tribute to HOA leadership and cultural legacy." I even put a little HOA logo in the corner, which I copied from their website. Not exact, but close enough to pass at a glance. Then I hand-delivered them to every house within a 3-block radius. Not with a smile, just calm, quiet efficiency. I gave one to Barbara's vice president, one to the guy with the rock garden shaped like Texas, even one to Cheryl at the front desk. I mailed one to their lawyer, just for fun. Inside the envelope was a polite note. Please join us this Saturday for a special performance recognizing the impact of local governance and community collaboration. Which, if you read it out loud, sounds like theater. But if you read between the lines, it was bait. And Barbara? She took it. I know because she RSVP'd in gold pen, literally signed the card in glittering cursive like she was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. I didn't advertise the event online, didn't alert the media. I wanted it to feel intimate, local, neighborhood only, which meant when the bomb dropped, no one would be able to dismiss it as internet drama or some outsider attack. It would happen right in front of their eyes, in their own words, on their own stage, with popcorn. The night before the show, I walked the amphitheater alone. Lights were tested, sound cues were programmed, my actors, community volunteers, were prepped. And the tape? That was ready too. It'd play at the end. Projected on the side of my house, big and undeniable. My uncle's voice, clear as day, echoing through the desert, calling her out, exposing everything. This wasn't just a show, it was opening night and closing argument. Saturday evening rolled in hot and still, the kind of desert heat that just sits on you, like it's judging your decisions. Perfect for drama. I'd set up the amphitheater like it was hosting a proper community gala. Folding chairs in neat arcs. Decorative string lights hung across the old mesquites. a podium at center stage, flanked by 2 potted plants I borrowed from my neighbor Dale, who still thinks I'm a yoga instructor, and right behind that, a pull-down screen I rigged using an old bedsheet, some wire, and about 40 zip ties. By 6:45 p.m., people started arriving, couples in matching polos, retirees with wine and thermoses. One guy wore a HOA Strong t-shirt, which I'm 80% sure he made himself. And then came the Clennons. Barbara showed up in a full pantsuit, which in Arizona heat is either a power move or a slow suicide. Her husband, Richard, trailed behind her looking like a man who hadn't made a decision since 2007. She walked straight up to me with that exact same smile from the first day we met. You know the one, all teeth, no warmth. And right there, clear as day, was our address. Not handwritten, not scribbled in as an afterthought. Printed, labeled. It was part of a section titled Phase 3, the same designation that showed up on the zoning map at city planning. But what made my stomach drop was the note scribbled in red ink next to our street. Pending reclassification, non-HOA designation under review, do not finalize until signatures are confirmed. Below it, in blue ink, was a checkmark and a date, and a signature. Len Carlisle. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself I was seeing it wrong. It wasn't a copy, it wasn't a forgery, it was real. Original ink, real paper, aged like it had been sitting in that box since the day we moved in. I took a picture of it and sent it to Doug. He called me maybe 10 minutes later, sounding more alert than I'd ever heard him. He asked, "You said that signature was original? Ink on paper?" I told him, yeah, it looked that way. He said, "That's a smoking gun." That right there is proof your lot was intended for HOA inclusion, at least conditionally, and if that's Len's signature, that means they knew. They knew exactly what they were doing. I asked, but if they signed it, why erase us later? And Doug said, because someone forgot to finalize the process. Maybe they assumed it went through. Maybe they thought no one would notice. And now, years later, the board realizes you're technically in a legal gray zone. That makes you dangerous. Because if your inclusion was never officially ratified, and you're still living like a full HOA member, that means every action they've taken involving your property could be challenged. They don't want that. So it wasn't a clerical error. It was damage control. They were rewriting history to clean up a screw-up that someone buried years ago. I told Julia. She didn't say anything at first. Then she just stood up, walked to the sink, and started laughing. Not the good kind of laugh, the kind that's sharp and bitter and dry at the end. She said, "They're trying to erase us because we make their math messy." And she was right. It wasn't personal. Not really. It was systemic. It was some spreadsheet that wouldn't balance, some legal thread that could unravel the whole fabric. And we were the knot. I knew then what I had to do. Not just defend our right to be here, but prove, once and for all, that we'd been here all along, that the people trying to delete us had known the truth from the start. And I had the signature to prove it. I didn't sleep much after finding that document. Not because I was afraid. That part had sort of burned out. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't pacing the kitchen waiting for a call that never came, or checking the mailbox like it might suddenly spit out an apology. I was wired in that quiet, surgical way, when your brain clicks into something colder than panic. I'd spent weeks reacting. Now it was time to move. First thing I did was scan everything. Not just the map with Len's signature, but the whole damn box. I created duplicates, uploaded them to encrypted cloud storage, emailed copies to myself, to Doug, even to a friend from college who works IT for a university, just in case something happened to my machines. I didn't say what it was about, just told him, hang on to this. Don't delete it. Julia saw what I was doing and didn't say a word. She just brought me coffee and helped line up the pages in the scanner, one by one. There was something almost ceremonial about it, like we were baptizing the truth, making it permanent. Then we started digging for more. If Len signed that document, there had to be a trail. HOA boards love their paper. They drown in it. Julia remembered that when we first moved in, we'd gotten a printed community calendar from one of the welcome baskets, back when people still smiled at us. I dug it out of a kitchen drawer and flipped to the back, where it listed all the board members at the time. Sure enough, Len had already been president. But there were other names too. One of them jumped out, Terrence Terry Malloy. I remembered him vaguely. Tall guy, always wore these god-awful salmon-colored polos and talked way too loud at barbecues. He vanished from the board about 2 years in. No big announcement, just kind of disappeared from the neighborhood grapevine. I figured he moved, but a quick search told me he was still in town, still in the same zip code. I found his number through a contractor registry site. Turns out he ran a home inspection service now. I called. He didn't answer. But 2 hours later, I got a text. If this is about Len, we should talk. We met the next day in the parking lot of a Dunkin' on the edge of town. It felt like a drug deal. I brought a manila folder, he brought a half-eaten cruller and a folder of his own. Turns out Terry left the HOA board not because he moved or retired or got bored. He left because Len pushed through a change in the HOA's charter that gave himself executive override on zoning disputes, something that technically required a full community vote. But it never went to a vote. It was buried in an amendment package that most residents never read, and Len pushed it through during an off-season when barely anyone attended meetings. Terry objected, loudly. The rest of the board didn't back him. He resigned quietly to avoid dragging his family into what he called the HOA civil war. But he kept records, emails, meeting minutes, screenshots of drafts that had different versions of community maps, one with our address marked included, another marked pending, and then a final version where our lot just vanished. He handed me a flash drive and said, "I've been sitting on this for 3 years, but you're the glitch he couldn't delete. You're the reason this all might finally come out." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said thanks. The next step was Erica Jordan. She was one of those always involved moms, the kind that volunteered for every bake sale and had 3 Google calendars for her kids' soccer practices. I hadn't seen her much lately, but Julia told me Erica had once served on a neighborhood beautification committee or something equally HOA sounding. I figured she'd either slam the door in my face or tell me I was overreacting. But when I showed her the documents, her hands actually started to shake. She said she remembered that meeting. The one where Len had us removed from the charter. It hadn't been announced as a vote. It was buried in a presentation about landscaping and new signage at the front gate. But she remembered someone asking about the map, why the neighborhood outline looked smaller. And she remembered Len brushing it off, saying it was a cartographic correction. She looked at me and said, "He told us you were a mistake that got grandfathered in, that it was never supposed to be residential." I said, "But he signed the damn plan." She said, "I know." Erica agreed to write a statement. She even offered to speak if it came to that, said she felt gross about staying quiet so long. And just like that, I had my pieces. The map, the signature, the original HOA materials, the removed documentation, the meeting minutes, a witness, and a motive. Now I just needed to figure out where to hit, not just legally, but publicly. Because Len's power wasn't just in the paperwork, it was in perception. He'd built this image of himself as the careful steward of a perfect neighborhood. Calm, organized, in control. My plan was simple: show people what happened when control became erasure, when the guy in charge started editing reality like a Word doc. I wasn't trying to burn Willow Bend down. I just wanted to prove we were real, that we had always been here, and that no amount of signatures or silent neighbors could change that. The first swing wasn't flashy. No courtroom showdown, no dramatic speech. It was an email. Just a plain, polite email to the HOA board with every single document attached. Terry's meeting notes, the signed site plan, screenshots of missing files, Erica's statement. I wrote one sentence in the body. "I am officially requesting reinstatement of our property's full HOA membership status and immediate cessation of any exclusionary actions being taken against my family." I copied Doug, our lawyer, and added a digital paper trail so thick you'd have to be actively trying not to see it. I hit send. Then I waited. Nothing came back. No reply. Not even a bounce. But 2 days later, our trash was picked up for the first time in over a month. That was the first crack. Then I took it public. Not Reddit, not Nextdoor, not the HOA Facebook group. I was still blocked from that clown show. No, I emailed every resident I had an address for. I used a contact list I pulled from an old block party RSVP spreadsheet. Sent the same files, no accusations, just documents, just truth. At first, silence, then trickles. A neighbor I barely knew, Jenna from 2 streets over, wrote back, "I always thought something weird happened with your property. Thanks for sharing." Another one, "I didn't vote on any amendment. Didn't even know there was one." Then I heard from Steve, the guy with the Under Armour addiction. His email was short. "This is messed up. If you need anything, let me know." It wasn't a flood, but it was movement. People weren't looking through me on the sidewalk anymore. Some of them even nodded. It was weird how much that meant. That's when Len made his first move. We got a notice taped to our front door. Not mailed, taped like we were squatters in a foreclosed house. It said we were officially non-compliant with HOA communication policies and were now being referred to outside legal counsel. No logo, no letterhead, just Black Times New Roman on white paper, signed LC at the bottom. I didn't even get mad. I laughed. It was desperate. He was losing the thread. Doug fired back with a formal response citing retaliation, misuse of authority, and potential civil rights violations. But that wasn't the part that really rattled them. The part that rattled them came later that week, when I showed up to the open board meeting. I hadn't been to one before. Most people didn't go unless something was getting built, banned, or bulldozed. It was held in the community room by the pool, the same room where I'd once sat through a CPR training class while someone's toddler ate goldfish crackers out of the carpet. I walked in with a folder under my arm, and I could feel the tension. Len was already seated at the front with his little name placard, flanked by 3 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The second he saw me, his expression froze, like I'd brought a camera crew or a subpoena. I nodded at him, real friendly. When it came time for community comments, I stood up and said, I'd like to submit documents for official review regarding my family's inclusion in this HOA dating back to 2018. I passed out copies, real paper ones this time, and I watched their faces as they flipped through. The plan, the signature, Erica's notarized letter, Terry's minutes, it landed like bricks on the table. Len started to interrupt, but I didn't raise my voice. I just said, You told the community my house was never part of this neighborhood. You told the school district. You even tried to have our address removed from public records. But this? I held up the signed plan. This says otherwise, and it has your name on it. A few people in the back started whispering. One of the board members, Janet, I think, leaned over to whisper something to Len. He didn't look at her, he just kept his eyes on me. I finished with this. My family has lived here for 5 years. We paid dues. We cleaned up after storms. Our kids go to school across the street. You tried to write us out like we were a clerical mistake, but we were never the mistake. This board was. Then I sat down. That was it. No fireworks, no mic drop, just the truth, spoken out loud, in front of the people who were never supposed to hear it. Later that night, I got a text from Brent, the zoning guy, the one who told me to print everything. It said, Whatever you did at that meeting, it worked. Word's getting around. People are pissed. I smiled, because the silence was cracking, and once silence cracks, it never fits back together the same way again. A few days after that board meeting, I noticed something odd during my usual walk with Max to school. Normally, people didn't make eye contact with us. Averted gazes, half smiles, the tight-lipped neighbor nod at best. But that morning, people looked right at me. One woman I didn't know, blonde ponytail, yoga mat, probably lived 2 blocks over, gave me this almost sheepish wave and said, Hey, I saw your thing. That was brave. I didn't even know what thing she meant yet. But I just nodded and we kept walking. By the time I got back home, my phone had a text from Erica. Turn on Channel 8. Local news, morning segment. There it was. Neighborhood dispute raises questions about HOA transparency. And smack in the middle of it, a grainy clip of me speaking at the board meeting. Someone had filmed it, probably one of the residents in the back. You could hear me say, You tried to write us out like we were a clerical mistake, but we were never the mistake. Then the reporter cut to an interview with Terry. He didn't name names, but he talked about undocumented changes and procedural manipulation and residents being selectively excluded from neighborhood services. Next thing I knew, my inbox exploded. Some were just neighbors who hadn't said a word in years suddenly finding their courage. Some were people from other HOAs, other towns. One woman wrote, This same thing happened to my parents in Nevada. Thank you for speaking up. Julia started fielding messages too. Parents at school reached out, apologizing, asking how we were holding up. One even sent cookies. She cried over cookies from a woman she barely knew. And then, the thing that really lit the match, Len panicked. It wasn't public at first, but word got around fast. He sent a mass email to the board trying to schedule a private emergency session. Someone leaked it, then someone else posted it on Reddit. That's when the real journalists came knocking. Not just local news, regional press, HOA watchdog blogs. Even a guy with a podcast about American suburban power structures reached out asking for an interview. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Len issued a formal statement on behalf of the HOA, said the whole thing was a miscommunication, that they welcomed all residents equally and were reviewing historical inconsistencies in documentation. Total PR word salad, and nobody bought it. By now, the HOA Facebook group was imploding. I wasn't in it, but Erica sent me screenshots, posts arguing about what had happened, residents furious they'd been lied to, or worse, complicit. A few still defended Len, claimed I was dramatizing a simple paperwork mistake. But most were pissed. One thread had over 300 comments. Then came the vote. Janet, one of the board members, submitted a petition to hold a special election to restructure the board. According to HOA bylaws, if they got signatures from at least 20% of residents, they could trigger it. They hit that number in 2 days. Doug and I showed up to the meeting where it went down. It was standing room only. More people than I'd ever seen show up for anything neighborhood-related, probably because they smelled blood in the water. Len sat at the front like usual, but something was different. His posture, his face. For the first time, he looked smaller. Not physically, just deflated. People stood up one by one and spoke. Not about me, not really. About him. About how he ran things. About decisions made behind closed doors. About meetings rushed through when no one was watching. About warnings they ignored because it was easier to assume everything was fine. Then the vote happened. And just like that, he was out. Removed as president by majority rule. Replaced by a new interim board made up of people who actually seemed like they gave a damn. Erica was one of them. So was Steve. Even Janet stayed on, which honestly surprised me. After the meeting, Len stood up, collected his briefcase, and left. No outburst. No, "you'll regret this" speech. Just walked out like a man clocking out of a job he never thought he'd lose. And here's the part that stuck with me. As he walked past me, he paused, looked at me, not angry, not smug, just tired. He said, "You really couldn't just let it go, huh?" And I said, "No, I couldn't." Because letting it go would have meant letting us go. And that was never an option. Max came home from school today with glitter in his hair. Some kind of art project involving glue and chaos. Ellie was mad because someone colored outside the lines on the group poster and ruined the whole theme. I was halfway through helping her spell responsibility in block letters when I realized I hadn't thought about the HOA once that day. And that's saying something. It's not over, not really. Bureaucracy doesn't just vanish because someone got voted out. There are still follow-ups, reviews, procedural cleanups. There's talk of revising the entire charter. Erica's leading that charge, bless her. She even asked if I'd consider joining the board. I told her I'd rather floss with a seatbelt, but I'd help her behind the scenes if she ever needed it. The weirdest thing about all this is how normal everything feels now. Not perfect, not some Disney Channel version of suburbia, but normal. People wave again, not all of them. Some still look a little uncomfortable when we walk by, like they're not sure if they should be apologizing or pretending they were on our side the whole time. But I don't need a parade, I just want peace. The letter's still in my drawer, the original one, the "vacate your property" joke of a threat. I keep it next to the signed site plan with Len's name on it. Julia once asked me why I don't throw it out now that everything's over. I told her I like remembering what it felt like to be erased. Not because I want to relive it, but because I don't ever want to forget how easy it is for people to do that to someone when it's convenient. We almost left, more than once, and honestly, I don't think that would have made us cowards. It would have made us exhausted parents trying to protect their kids, but we didn't. We stayed, and I'm proud of that. Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit out on the porch while the neighborhood goes still. You can hear the hum of distant AC units, the occasional bark, wind in the trees. It's nothing special. But it's mine. It's ours. Not because a file says so, not because a vote says so, but because we lived it. Day in, day out. And no one, no policy, no board, no disappearing emails can take that away. You know what the funniest part is? The key fob works again. Gate opens on the first try. Ellie calls it the proof button. Every time we walk through, she gives it a little dramatic pause and says, "See? We're real." And I just smile, because yeah, we are.